The Living Force is a canon novel that takes place in the prequel era, shortly before the events of The Phantom Menace and after the events of the High Republic, and it was written by John Jackson Miller. We talked a bit about him when we looked at the Batman Resurrection novel a while back, but the writer has a pretty thorough history in Star Wars, both in canon and legends, starting in the universe writing the Knights of the Old Republic comic series along with some mini-series before finally cracking into Star Wars novels, starting with Kenobi and most recently writing this novel, The Living Force. John Jackson Miller was approached to do a novel on the Jedi Council, so Miller proposed that it would show Qui-Gon basically trying to get the Jedi Council to open up and start working more directly with the people of the galaxy, rather than just sitting in their ivory tower working on the galaxy's more macro problems. The book also coincided with the 25th anniversary of The Phantom Menace, hence many of these characters are expanded, and it connects directly to that film. It is also meant to kind of show the degradation of the Jedi traditions of the High Republic to an old, overconfident organization that is so taxed by the macro problems that it's starting to kind of dilute the message of the Jedi Order. This book basically being the dying breath of the Jedi before the Sith return and the Order is thrown on its head, tying the main films into the High Republic a little better. This book was also followed up months later by Mace Windu the Glass Abyss, which sort of sees some follow-up to what happened in The Phantom Menace, just kind of expanding that film, though not directly tying into this book by any means. The Living Force takes place in 33 BBY, 1 year before The Phantom Menace, among numerous Jedi outposts closing across the galaxy as Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon see planets, residences, lives in shambles as emboldened pirates in Hutt space and other criminals take opportunities to try to cause some chaos across many planets. Qui-Gon tells the Jedi Council that this is happening, leading to the disenfranchisement of people who are forced to flee their homes in these areas, and that the Jedi as a whole have been looking so hard at the larger strokes of the galaxy that they're missing the residents of the galaxy who live in smaller worlds like these and their kind of day-by-day struggles. Noting while solving small issues won't end all issues the Jedi have, showing their presence on planets and outposts may make these people see a little more value to the Jedi than they do currently, even if they're just scaring off some small-time crooks. This is when we meet Zalastra, the leader of a group of crooks called the Rift Walkers, who took on a small child as a crime prodigy. Though this child, Kayla Lamada, has befriended and undercover Depa Billaba after one of Depa's students, Zan Ral, was killed by the group. The Jedi decide they will hold a closing ceremony for an outpost on the planet Quen, also using that time to connect with the people of the Republic they protect so fiercely. The outpost is Sanctuary Mount, which is ran by a lowly old man Vo, who's dedicated his life to the fort. While the Jedi Council starts showing up, each council member takes on missions, including Evan Peel, who tries to help Delicate Use, Master Oppo, who just kind of kicks around, Mace Windu, who fights pirates with a crew of rich kids on the Assurance Space Corvette, Plo Koon and Sacy Tin, who help resolve a dispute with the transportation services, who are giving driver jobs to droids. Master Koth and Rancis investigate some missing Jedi texts from the outpost and help clean out a lady's old hoarder house. Caillou Monday helps a married woman who's hitting on him reconcile with her workaholic husband. Yoda meets a sad man who runs an entertainment venue and sets up the closing celebration with him while helping him reconcile with his father's declining health and a changing world, as Yaddle plays PR for the Jedi. All this while Depa moves up the ranks of the Rift Walkers and starts gaining Celastra's trust, who eventually reveals she hates the Jedi and wants them dead for taking only her friends away and abandoning her in Hutt space, leading to her becoming the ruthless pirate she is today. Zalastra eventually plans on bombing the Jedi and mounting an assault on Quen that she hopes will lead to mounting Jedi deaths and prove they aren't as important to the galaxy as people thought they were, while upping her rep in the pirate underworld throughout Hutt space. This attack eventually does happen, with the Jedi becoming victorious and stopping the assault with the help of Depa's intel, with Depa eventually being discovered by Zalastra and Kayla being briefly held hostage. In the end, Zalastra is captured and they learn Sifo Dyas, who was paranoid a war was coming and was recently killed at the time of this novel, was the one who failed to help Zalastra in a rush to gain more Jedi forces. In the end, the Jedi celebrate despite the war on Quen causing the destruction of the temple, and Yoda comforts the sad party planner again, who as it turns out was doing crime to help pay for his dad's medical issues, but was harmed trying to do the right thing and make up for his crimes. Yoda ended up comforting his dad as he passed away, while the measly planner was in the hospital with the Jedi, absolving him of guilt and making him kind of a hero for his actions to fix his problems. Though we also learn the now jobless and grumpy Vo was the one who took the missing text that some of the Jedi were looking for earlier, feeding them to Palpatine, who sends Darth Maul to assassinate him after learning that Vo kept some of the texts for himself. The Jedi all depart the planet, with each having learned to really embrace the small aspects of life, something they would embrace till the Sith came back the next year, and as the Clone Wars commenced, which made them largely miss these aspects of the Force again. Anyhow, I bet that was a really productive year that they got going there before everything went to shit, I guess. The novel has 5 million characters, so I'll try to make this quick. Each council member varies in importance, but hey, if you want to learn about some Jedi, here we go. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan start this novel on a civilian vessel on their way back to Coruscant. However, after a foiled hijacking by a few less than competent goons, many of the civilians, now realizing these two men are Jedi, start to confront Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan about the condition of Hutt space, as the Jedi seem to be pulling out and the pirates and crime lords are driving people from their homes. Pondering this, Qui-Gon realizes two things. One, that the Jedi can't save everyone and do literally everything, but also that they are beacons of hope that almost act as ambassadors and protectors to the Republic's compromised peace. Second, that the Jedi need to start leaving their temple more often to work with people on small things which will inspire hope, as well as just fuel the Force within them. Remember Qui-Gon's philosophy in The Phantom Menace, where he reminds Obi-Wan to be mindful of the living Force. Well, as the title implies, Qui-Gon hopes to use the closing of the Jedi outpost on Quen to push the Council to better see the philosophy, challenging the Council to go to the planet, which they end up agreeing to do, which causes them to live in the moment more. Yoda is one of the oldest Jedi and clearly remembers many of the now shuddering High Republic era Jedi outposts back when they opened. And he also kind of recalls that at this time Jedi lived a little more in the moment and is naturally excited to take Qui-Gon Jinn up on his challenge. Yoda on Quen meets a sad man, Lariel Lun, who Yoda sees as troubled. Yoda learns that he's an event planner and hires him to host the celebration of the Jedi outpost, but also eventually learns he is working with criminals as a mule to basically make enough money to pay his elderly dad's bills, as the event planning industry's been going to shit since the Jedi have been pulling out. Lun puts himself in harm's way to help the Jedi and makes amends shortly before the pirate invasion at the end of the book, and while critically injured, Yoda visits his dad and bonds with the old man on the serenity of death, and also knows that Lun is a good man with terrible circumstances and can still be saved from the darkness, a redemption Yoda helps him see through. Adi Gallia largely accompanies Yoda. She's a wiser than her years member of the Jedi Council. She accompanies Yoda for much of the book, and as such is thoroughly overshadowed by the more famous Jedi, but especially early on you get a sense that she and Yoda are sort of the biggest diplomats in the Council, reporting to Palpatine and the Senate and whatnot. Yaddle is pretty important to the novel and gives some major main character energy throughout the book. The thing I like about Yaddle is that George Lucas just stuck a second girl Yoda in the background of The Phantom Menace for no reason, and everyone just kind of said, oh, girl Yoda. Since then, I feel Yaddle has definitely been expanded to prove everyone that she is indeed just a girl Yoda. No, but I think she's a little more compassionate and kind and kind of a hippie Yoda. Yoda, for his part, can be kind of a dick and is also stubborn even though he's wise. Yaddle is patient, kind, and gentle, which I think made her expanded story interesting, especially in canon when she does stuff like dying trying to redeem Dooku, but is kind of being kind the whole time and trying to pull him back. I think that's kind of an interesting aspect to take this Jedi. Yaddle in the book is trying to get the world out on the Jedi festivities. She's kind of the woman of the people who becomes something of a celebrity and trying to bring the message that the Jedi are here to help and observe the culture and whatnot. She also befriends a local journalist, Morn, who's a young cub reporter that's having a hard time in the rough and tumble field of journalism that Yaddle helps not only to raise her up, but have her voice heard, which I thought was a sweet little arc. Oppo Rancis is great. He's really just an elderly snake man. He actually had a lot to do with opening this outpost centuries earlier as a young man during the High Republic era. He's just here to have a good time with his old buddy Vo and his Jedi pals, and is just everyone's nice grandpa. He's also notably the only Jedi on the Council besides Yoda to survive the Jedi Purge, going into such deep hiding he never resurfaced. So there you go, the elderly snake man slithered off. Perhaps he'll bother Ryan Gosling as his sidekick in the new untitled Sean Levy Star Wars spin-off film. Vo is the outpost caretaker who has meticulously been holding down the fort for decades and shining the nightly ceremonial light from the outpost, kind of like a bell ringer at a church. He seems depressed that the temple is closing and growing pretty weary with old age. During the novel, there's a bit of a mystery on what happened to some of the literature at the temple, though the answer goes apparently unsolved as far as the Jedi know, but they all kind of just brush it off. As it turns out, Vo was contracted by Palpatine, who was collecting these missing resources to be used for his Sith studies, while Vo was set to destroy certain documents, though we find out he was selling them to collectors. This eventually leads to Darth Maul killing Vo. Depa Billaba was not on Coruscant when Qui-Gon challenged the Council to live more in the present. Depa was on a solo mission undercover, trying to help quell the rising pirate action in the sector after similar base closures had caused crime to soar. Eventually, she infiltrates Zalastra's crime organization, the Rift Walkers, though her connection with the young girl Kayla, who idolizes Zalastra and thinks Billaba is her first employee on her path to becoming a criminal like Zalastra, which I thought was kind of cute. Depa naturally starts to really care for Kayla and wants to rescue her from the Rift Walkers before things turn out sour, but also wants to upend the plan of the Rift Walkers to sabotage the Jedi's ceremony and rises up the ranks of crime, since Zalastra is becoming brutal and quickly taking out other rival gangs in this portion of Hutt space, leaving bodies in her wake. Zalastra is sort of interesting, since not only is she climbing the ranks of the criminal underworld, dragging her crime family up with her, but she also has a personal hatred for the Jedi. She's an Nautilin like Kit Fisto, and as a child was an orphan following the death of her mother, and after making two close friends, Jedi Sifo Dyas showed up to take her friends away to train at the Jedi Temple, but left Zalastra abandoned alone, and eventually leading to her life of crime and hatred for the Jedi. I like the moment this revelation comes out, because much of the Council was appalled by this, but also admitted the late Master Sifo Dyas would always do shit like this, and that he was overly paranoid, with us later learning that the Master was basically manipulated into creating the clone army by Count Dooku. I think this adds a bit to Sifo Dyas' character, but I also think it shows that the Jedi, especially with the very, very strange rules they had during this era, caused things like this to happen, and while Jedi have protocol to avoid such a scenario, Sifo Dyas cut corners, and that led to a planetary coup that almost led to the fall of Quen. At the end of the day, Zalastra couldn't simply be redeemed, but the Jedi understood why she did what she did and acknowledged that in a way the Jedi Order was at fault for what happened, basically inadvertently creating the monster Zalastra would become. Speaking of Sifo Dyas, before he became a standalone character, his name was supposed to be Sido Dyas, or just Sidious spelt really stupid, and it was just gonna be a name for Sidious undercover, but then they said actually that shit is really fucking stupid, so they wrote it out while simultaneously just kind of making up this character and being too lazy to change the name too thoroughly. They just pop the D out and replace it with an F. Pretty fucking weird. Mace Windu is on a side quest on a spaceship trying to help Deppa and eventually making it down to the party and the battle. He isn't really all that important, but honestly, given the fact that we got a whole novel from him just a few months later, I think overusing him may have sort of cheapened the concept. Also, out of all the council members, he falls just short of Yoda for having the most lore, so we probably didn't need much more, especially when there's so many other Jedi that are kind of undercooked when compared to those two. Koth is on the Jedi Council, but feels more like an intern. He spends much of the novel sorting through paperwork for the Shuddering Temple, eventually noticing some of the inventory is missing, which of course leads to the subplot about Palpatine collecting some artifacts off of Ro. So that's cool, I guess. John Jackson Miller wanted to make him kind of this young aristocrat in kind of a college student kind of way, inspired by his own college years. So that might explain why he's the way he is. Honestly, is probably the Jedi I feel got shafted the hardest in this one. He just has little interesting to actually do. Evan Peel helps to tackle the delinquent youth problem with a bunch of school skipping thugs running around town. Naturally, it isn't that simple, as basically with the fall of tourism and economic collapse from everyone fleeing Gwen, the kids just don't have resources at school. Eventually, Evan pulls the kids into their own event planning and gives them more confidence in being themselves and not becoming thugs the way the underprivileged youth sometimes tended to. It's a nice message about lifting up the next generation, especially in poorer areas, and I think it actually has some real-world morals to it, so I thought that was kind of cool. Plo Koon and Saesee Tiin get trapped in a labor dispute between sentients and droid taxi drivers, with the droids being assaulted by the sentients who lost their jobs unfairly to droids. Eventually, Plo Koon and Saesee Tiin sees a compromise that can increase business and keep people employed and making money, since droids are kind of shitty drivers but good at doing maintenance. It's almost like real life. Ki-Adi-Mundi and L'Oreal Poof are kicking around the planet when a female alien tries risen up Ki-Adi-Mundi, and he declines but learns her workaholic husband has been sneaking around. As it turns out, he's just busy with work, and Ki-Adi and Yariel help them with their marriage problems the best way weird celibate monks possibly could. They also try to stop some enforcers here and there that are causing trouble. In the end, everyone fights in a giant Jedi pirate war thing that was sort of fun. Anyhow, The Living Force goes through a number of tones, and I think it's largely a book about discovery. The Jedi seek to determine what is going on with the planet Quen and live more in the moment, or the Force, I guess. Zalastra is kind of one of those sympathetic villains I think we see pretty often. She's evil and terrible, but it's largely due to her circumstances and the sins of the Jedi Order as a whole, which created her. I think this sets her apart a bit from the Jedi who go to the dark side, which is a common theme. Zalastra wasn't born bad, but a tough life crafted her into darkness. She was never found. Nothing significant happens to her, so she just kind of had to make herself significant. Darkness wasn't something she embraced, it was just what she became due to her circumstances. I find that interesting, and I think a character like Zalastra is a good foil to the Jedi, since there isn't a binary or linear path she took. Her life isn't black and white, which I think the Jedi Sith stories can sometimes feel. I also think it kind of mirrors Kayla, who could easily turn to the dark side type of path, or she could go to be more of an upstanding citizen, the way that Jedis believe she should. The pros are neat too. I think along with descriptive scenes and character descriptions, I think where Miller shined the most was showing each character and profiling them as something beyond a background extra that got named on a toy box. Miller did a good job adapting Yoda, Mace Windu, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan, the most fleshed out of the characters that appear here, but lesser known characters like Oppa, Evan Peel, and Yaddle were pretty well expanded as well. I also think the concept of kind of this huge story that acts as a cap to the High Republic era, going into the endless unrest we see the galaxy fall into, during the Rise of the Sith, Clone Wars, and Imperial eras was kind of good, especially since the High Republic, by my understanding, is gonna be kind of coming to an end. This book is also pretty chill. There's definitely problems, but Zalastra is a hell of a lot less of a problem than the Death Star, and all that stuff is just a fraction of what this book is, which largely serves as a character study. Granted, it's a character study of over a dozen characters, but hey, it's a long book, and even if it's a bit slower, I found it unique to say the least. When there's action too, like the Battle of Quen, it's well done, so I'll just throw that in there too. It's not a total snooze, even though it's a bit slow at moments. I may be late to the party a bit to jump on the Ki-Adi-Mundi age hate train that the Acolyte spawns, but Yariel Poof, who's hanging out with Mundi for a good portion of the book, mentions like 10 times that Mundi is much too young to remember a bunch of shit like the Grand Renewal, and that he's practically just a little baby. Probably a play on that Ki-Adi-Mundi looks old, but Yariel Poof is actually quite old, but is in theory much younger than Yariel Poof, with Miller probably going off Ki-Adi-Mundi's age in Legends, which would make him around 60 years old in this novel. But it makes less sense when we see that he was already pretty old looking in The Acolyte, which takes place like 80 years earlier. This novel dropped 2 months before the show, so that probably explains it. But makes me further question why he was put in the show when you had Yoda, Yaddle, Poof, and Oppa there, which you could have all had cameo in this time period rather than Mundi. At this point, just put Mace Windu or Qui-Gon in the show and say they're like 120, I don't know. I just thought it was funny, especially since the book repeatedly, illicitly implies that he wasn't around during that portion of Jedi history, and the fact that it would become a controversy just months later with the Acolyte, I don't know. Overall, I really like this book. I like John Jackson Miller. He makes good stuff, as we already saw with our look at the Batman book, Batman Resurrection. And I liked his Kenobi novel as well, which we'll talk about sooner or later. I think I appreciated just how chill his books are relatively. Everything builds and we get good looks at our characters along with some really nice action and adventure to help make the book feel more exciting when it needs to be. I also think a lot of these characters aren't really warriors per se. I'm sure we could get an Oppa or Poof jumping around, Ki-Adi-Mundi leading an army or whatever, but as the Jedi High Council at a time of peace, these people don't really fight. That's not really what the book's objective was, and I found this to be an interesting addition to the lore, even if it's not just one giant sword fight the way some of these books can turn out.